The grand hall stood like a living memory of both past and present, glowing with golden light that danced across carved wooden walls and rich traditional fabrics. It was a night of honor, a night when the community gathered to celebrate those who had contributed to its growth. Yet beneath the beauty and celebration, there was a quiet presence that many could not see but could somehow feel. The elders often said that on nights like this, the ancestors sit among the living, watching every action, every intention, every hidden truth. And so the air felt heavy, as if unseen eyes were silently judging every heart in the room. Around the center of the hall, respected elders sat in a wide circle, their presence calm but powerful. Their clothing carried the colors and patterns of generations, each thread telling a story of wisdom and sacrifice. Beside them sat wealthy men and women, their jewelry shining, their voices confident, their laughter filling the hall. Yet there was an unspoken distance between them and the elders, as if tradition and modern success were sharing the same space but not the same understanding. One elder leaned slightly forward and said softly, "When wealth speaks louder than wisdom, the ground beneath a man becomes uncertain." A few around him nodded, though most did not fully grasp his meaning. Among the guests, a man entered with strong confidence in his steps. His suit was sharp, his presence commanding, and many turned their heads as he walked through the hall. People whispered his name with admiration, praising his success and the empire he had built. But behind his confident smile was a deeper pride, one that made him believe he stood above others. He greeted the elders with a slight nod, not the deep respect tradition demanded, but just enough to appear polite. In his heart, he believed wealth had already placed him beyond the need for old customs or quiet wisdom. A nearby elder watched him closely and murmured, "A man who forgets where he comes from will one day forget where he is going." Soon after, a woman entered quietly, her presence soft yet deeply steady. She wore a traditional dress that carried the patterns of her heritage, simple yet rich with meaning. She did not draw attention through noise or force, but through calm dignity. As she walked, her eyes reflected respect for everyone around her, especially the elders. She stopped, bowed her head slightly, and greeted them with humility. One elderly woman looked at her and whispered to another, "There is strength in her silence, like the river that shapes stone without making noise." Though many in the hall barely noticed her at first, a few elders followed her with quiet respect, sensing something deeper beneath her gentle presence. Then the atmosphere shifted again as another woman entered, drawing attention instantly. She moved with confidence, her modern dress shining under the lights like a bright flame. Conversations paused, and many eyes turned toward her beauty. She smiled easily, enjoying the admiration, walking as though the hall itself had opened for her arrival. People whispered in approval, praising her appearance and charm, calling her the image of modern success. Yet when she passed the elders, their expressions did not change. They watched her in silence, not with admiration, but with careful observation, as if reading something hidden beneath her glow. One elder simply said, "Beauty that forgets roots is like a tree without soil. It may stand, but not for long." In that moment, the hall felt divided without anyone speaking of it. On one side stood tradition, humility, and unseen strength. On the other stood pride, appearance, and surface admiration. And in the center of it all, unseen tensions slowly began to rise, as if the night itself was preparing to reveal something no one in the hall was ready to face. As time passed, the husband's heart slowly changed, though not in a way that brought wisdom or peace. Instead, it became heavier with pride and shame. In public, he smiled and spoke with confidence, but in private moments, he began to feel embarrassed by his wife's simplicity. He started to compare her quiet nature with the flashy world he now belonged to. Society's voices, full of status and appearance, slowly poisoned his thoughts. He began to believe that simplicity was weakness, forgetting that in African tradition, humility is often the strongest form of dignity. An elder once said, "When a man starts to bow to the opinions of the crowd, he forgets the voice of his own home." The pressure around him grew like a silent storm. Wealthy friends praised him, but also expected him to appear even more refined, more aligned with their modern world. Their words slowly shaped his decisions. Instead of protecting his marriage, he began to see it as something that limited his image. In his mind, a dangerous idea formed, one that did not come from love, but from pride. He would not leave his wife quietly. He would not respect tradition in separation. Instead, he would make a public statement that would show control, dominance, and power. In his heart, he said, "Let the world see who I choose to stand beside me." So he made a decision wrapped in cruelty and ego. He would bring both his wife and the mistress to the grand gala. To him, it was not about unity or honesty. It was about rewriting his story in front of society. He wanted to appear as a man who had risen beyond old ties, a man who could choose his own path without consequences. But in African wisdom, it is said, a man who writes his story without truth will one day read it with shame. Still, he moved forward, blind to the meaning of his own actions. Inside the grand preparations for the gala, the most important place was not the stage or the decorations, but the seat beside the host. That seat carried honor, legacy, and recognition. It was not given lightly. It represented trust from the community and respect earned through character, not appearance. Elders often said that the seat beside a man reveals the true story of his life, more than his words ever could. Yet the husband saw it differently now. To him, it was just a symbol he could control, not a responsibility he should respect. On the night of preparation, two women stood in contrast, though neither spoke against the other. The wife chose a traditional dress woven with quiet beauty, its patterns carrying the stories of her ancestors. It was simple, but every thread spoke of truth, dignity, and heritage. The mistress, on the other hand, wore modern elegance that shone brightly under light, drawing attention with every movement. One represented roots, patience, and history. The other represented surface beauty, admiration, and temporary charm. An elder watching from afar whispered, "When truth and illusion stand in the same place, time will always reveal the difference." When the night of the gala finally arrived, the hall filled with elders, leaders, and respected voices of the community. The air was heavy with expectation. But as the gathering grew, the husband made a decision that broke an old and sacred law of respect. In front of everyone, especially the elders whose presence demanded honor, he gave a harsh command. His voice cut through the music and conversation as he ordered security to remove his wife from the hall. The room froze. Even the drums seemed to lose their rhythm for a moment. The wife did not shout or resist. She simply stood with quiet dignity as she was taken away, her silence louder than any protest. The elders looked on in shock, their eyes filled with disappointment, as if witnessing not just disrespect to a woman, but a breaking of tradition itself. One elder slowly said, "When respect is dragged out of a hall, shame enters without invitation." At the husband's sharp command, the atmosphere in the grand hall changed instantly. What was once a place of honor and celebration turned cold, as two security men stepped forward. Their footsteps echoed against the polished floor, heavy and uncertain, as though even they felt the weight of what they were about to do. The husband pointed toward his wife without hesitation, his voice firm and unkind. "Take her out. She has no place here anymore," he said, loud enough for many to hear. A silence fell so deep it felt like even the ancestors held their breath in disappointment. The security men moved toward the wife, their faces tense, unsure whether they were enforcing justice or committing disrespect. One of them lowered his voice and said, "Madam, please come." The wife looked at them calmly, her eyes steady like a river that refuses to be disturbed by stones. There was no anger in her face, no fear, no begging. Only quiet understanding. In that moment, she stood taller in silence than many did in pride. As they gently but firmly guided her away, the hall watched a sacred line of respect break before their eyes, a line that should never be crossed in the presence of elders. As she walked, some guests shifted uncomfortably. A young woman whispered, "Why is she not fighting back?" An older man beside her replied softly, "Because not all strength makes noise. Some strength walks away with dignity." The wife did not look back, even once. Her silence carried something powerful, something the loudest voice in the room could not match. It was the silence of a woman who knew her worth even when others failed to see it. Behind her, the hall was no longer calm. Murmurs began to rise like wind before a storm. Some guests shook their heads in disbelief, unable to understand what they had just witnessed. "This is wrong," one voice said quietly. "But who will speak against him?" another replied. Fear held some tongues back, while others looked down in shame, unwilling to support cruelty but also unwilling to challenge power. The room became divided, not by words, but by silence and discomfort. The elders, however, remained still, their eyes heavy with silent judgment, as if recording every action for a justice that would come later. Then, without shame or hesitation, the husband turned toward the mistress and gestured for her to come forward. A small smile appeared on his face, as if he had just won something important. "Come," he said gently, as though nothing had just been broken. The mistress walked forward, confused but eager to accept the attention. He guided her to the seat once meant for his wife, and placed her there as if changing a story could erase its truth. Around them, the air felt heavier, as though the seat itself remembered who truly belonged there. The seat beside him was not just wood and fabric. It carried honor, recognition, and the trust of the community. It was a seat earned through respect, not desire. Yet now, it was given through pride and illusion. The mistress sat, adjusting her posture slightly, trying to appear comfortable, but something in the air felt different. It was as if unseen eyes were watching her more closely than anyone else. As she settled in, she suddenly felt it, a quiet pressure that could not be explained. The elders were watching her, not with admiration, but with deep, silent observation. Their eyes carried weight, like they were reading something she could not see. Her earlier confidence began to fade slightly, replaced by a small, uneasy feeling she could not name. She forced a smile, but her hands tightened slightly in her lap. One elder leaned toward another and whispered softly, "A seat does not change a person's worth, but it always reveals it." The words hung in the air like a warning carried by the wind. The mistress tried to ignore the feeling, but the silence around her grew heavier, as if the very hall was questioning her presence. And in that moment, without anyone speaking it aloud, a quiet truth began to form. Some places cannot be claimed, only earned. The hall grew heavier with meaning as the mistress sat in the honored seat, unaware of the deeper truth woven into its very foundation. An elder nearby leaned slightly and spoke in a low, steady voice, as if sharing a secret carried through generations. "That seat is not made of wood alone," he said. "It is made of memory. It carries the weight of families who gave without asking for praise, and leaders who served without seeking glory." His words drifted through the air like smoke from a sacred fire, reminding those who listened that true honor is never ordinary. The husband, still standing with pride, did not fully understand the silence of the elders. But around him, something subtle was shifting. The elders exchanged slow, knowing glances, their eyes speaking a language older than words. One elder gently nodded toward another, as if confirming a truth they had already known long before this night began. "He does not see it yet," one of them murmured softly. "But the roots always speak louder than the branches." Their silence was not confusion, it was recognition, as though they were watching a story already written by time itself. As the evening continued, the atmosphere of celebration began to change. What was once a gathering of joy slowly turned into something deeper, something sacred. The music did not stop, but it softened, as if even the drums were listening. Conversations became quieter, more thoughtful. It felt as though the hall itself was no longer just hosting a celebration, but conducting a test, one that measured not wealth or appearance, but true worth. A young guest whispered, "Why does it feel like we are being watched?" An older woman replied, "Because we are. Not only by elders, but by truth itself." In the middle of this shifting atmosphere, small pieces of the wife's past began to surface like forgotten echoes. A servant nearby quietly said to another, "That woman. I think I have seen her family name before." The other looked surprised. "Her family?" he asked. The servant nodded slowly. They were known for helping villages build wells, schools, and shelters. But they never put their names on anything. These whispers spread gently through the crowd, unnoticed by the husband, but deeply felt by the elders who already understood what was unfolding. One elder turned slightly and spoke with calm certainty. "So she is from that line," he said. "The ones who gave even when no one was watching." Another elder replied, "Yes, those who built without praise are never truly forgotten. They are only silent until the time of truth arrives." Their words carried a deep respect, as if the wife's presence in the hall had suddenly taken on a new meaning that others were only beginning to understand. The wife, still sitting quietly after her removal and return, remained calm. She did not speak of her past, nor did she try to defend herself. But her silence now felt different. It was no longer the silence of pain, It was the silence of someone who carries a legacy far greater than recognition. A young woman nearby leaned toward another guest and whispered, "She looks so simple, but why do I feel like she carries something powerful?" The other replied softly, "Because not all strength announces itself. Some strength is inherited." The elders continued to observe her, their respect growing with every passing moment. One of them finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Tonight was meant to honor those who serve this community," he said. "But it seems the greatest servant among us has been sitting quietly all along." His words settled into the room like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of realization across those who listened carefully. And as the truth slowly began to rise through whispers and memories, it became clear that this gathering was no ordinary celebration. It was a mirror, one that revealed not only who stood in honor, but also who truly understood the meaning of it. The hall remained bright with celebration, yet a strange heaviness had settled in the air. The husband stood with his chest lifted, still blind to the truth forming quietly around him. He believed his success was built only by his own strength, his own choices, and his own pride. He did not see the invisible roots beneath his life, the quiet sacrifices, the hidden support, and the woman he had cast aside. An elder nearby watched him and whispered softly, "A man who forgets where his blessings come from will one day mistake the ground beneath him for his own making." The guests continued to murmur, but the energy of the room was changing. The host slowly stepped forward, his presence calm but commanding, like someone carrying a message that cannot be delayed. He raised his hand, and immediately the hall began to quiet. Even the music softened, as if it understood what was coming. The host spoke with a steady voice, "Tonight is not only a night of honor, but a night of revelation." His words spread through the hall like fire through dry grass, and every head turned toward him in expectation. Attention rose quickly, filling every corner of the room. The mistress, who had once sat proudly in the honored seat, suddenly felt something unfamiliar. Her confidence began to shake slightly as she looked around and noticed the elders watching not with admiration, but with deep awareness. She leaned slightly toward the husband and whispered, "Why do they keep looking at me like that?" The husband, still confident, replied with a small smile, "Ignore them. Tonight is ours." But even as he spoke, the atmosphere felt heavier, as if the air itself was pressing down with truth that could no longer be ignored. The husband still stood firm in his pride, believing nothing could disturb his image. He straightened his suit and looked around with satisfaction, thinking the night was unfolding exactly as he planned. But pride has a way of blinding a man to the storm forming around him. An elder nearby murmured, "When a man walks too proudly, even shadows begin to follow him differently." Yet the husband heard nothing that could break his confidence. He believed himself untouchable in that moment. But above all voices, there was a silent law moving through the hall, an ancient truth carried through generations. It was the law of roots and consequences. Those who forget their beginnings, who dishonor bonds built on trust and love, will always meet a moment when truth demands balance. A young guest whispered nervously, "Something is not right tonight." An older woman replied calmly, "It is not wrong. It is just truth arriving late, but never missing its path." The host finally stepped forward again, his eyes steady as they scanned the crowd. The hall fell into complete silence. He raised his voice and said, "Now, the time has come to call the one whose presence has been hidden, but whose legacy holds this gathering together." Every breath in the room seemed to pause. Even the husband turned slightly, sensing for the first time that something was shifting beyond his control. The mistress gripped the edge of her seat, her heart beating faster without understanding why. The host continued, his voice firm and filled with respect, "The true guest of honor, the one whose story is tied to the foundation of this very gathering, stepped forward." A deep silence followed. The kind of silence where truth prepares to reveal itself, and no pride, no wealth, and no illusion can stop it. The elders lowered their heads slightly, as if acknowledging a truth already known to them. And in that moment, the entire hall waited, unaware that everything they believed about the night was about to change forever. The hall fell into a silence so deep that it felt alive. The drums, which had once carried the rhythm of celebration, now stood still as if even they were listening. Voices disappeared one by one, until only the sound of breathing remained. It was not an ordinary silence, it was heavy, sacred, and full of unseen presence. Many said later that in moments like this, The ancestors draw close, watching how truth unfolds among the living. An elder whispered softly, "When silence becomes this heavy, it is because truth is walking into the room." From the back of the hall, a soft movement began. The wife stepped forward again, but this time, nothing about her felt small or forgotten. She walked with calm strength, her steps steady like someone who knows her worth even when the world doubts her. The air around her seemed to change, as if the room itself was making space for her return. Her traditional attire, simple yet meaningful, now seemed to carry a deeper light. A young guest whispered, "Is this the same woman they removed?" An older woman replied, "No, she was always this. We were the ones who could not see." As she moved closer, the elders slowly began to rise from their seats. One by one, then together, they stood in unison. Their action was not forced or spoken, it came from recognition. They placed their hands respectfully before them, bowing their heads slightly. One elder spoke with a firm but gentle voice, "We greet you, daughter of honor." Another added, "Long have we waited for truth to return to its rightful place." The room stirred again, but this time it was not confusion, it was realization. The wife did not respond with pride, only with quiet humility, as if she had never left her rightful place. Then came the truth that changed everything. The host stepped forward and spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "This gathering," he said, "this hall, this celebration, all of it stands because of the unseen hands of this woman and her family." A wave of shock moved through the crowd. He continued, "Her parents were among those who gave without asking for recognition. They built foundations in this community that many of us still stand upon today." Murmurs spread quickly as people began to connect forgotten stories, old acts of kindness, and silent contributions that had shaped their lives. The wife remained still, her expression calm. She had never spoken of her past, never used it for advantage. An elder nodded slowly and said, "Now we understand. The strongest trees are not the ones that shout in the wind, but the ones that quietly hold the forest together." The lesson settled into the hearts of those listening. Her humility had not hidden her greatness, it had preserved it, waiting for the right time to be revealed. A young man whispered, "She carried all this and never spoke of it?" The elder replied, "True greatness does not announce itself. It waits for truth to speak for it." Across the hall, the husband stood frozen. His pride, once strong like stone, now cracked under the weight of what he was hearing. Realization entered his eyes slowly, like a shadow spreading across daylight. The wealth he boasted of, the success he claimed as only his own, suddenly felt borrowed from a truth he had ignored. His voice failed him as he looked at the woman he had dismissed. A man nearby whispered, "He did not see the ground he stood on." Another replied, "And now the ground has spoken back." His confidence collapsed in front of everyone. The same people he once tried to impress now looked at him differently, not with anger, but with disappointment. The elders remained silent, but their silence carried judgment deeper than words. The husband lowered his gaze for the first time, feeling the weight of his own actions return to him. An old proverb seemed to echo through the hall, as if spoken by unseen lips. When a man throws shame into the world, it always finds its way back home. The hall no longer carried the warmth of celebration. What remained was a cold heaviness, like the air before a storm that has already passed but left its damage behind. The crowd that once admired the husband now looked at him differently. Their eyes no longer carried respect or excitement. Instead, there was silence filled with disappointment. People avoided his gaze, not out of fear, but out of quiet judgment. One elder murmured softly, "A man may win the praise of many, but lose it in a single moment of pride." No one argued with him. The mistress, who had once entered the hall with confidence and shining beauty, now felt the weight of every stare. The same people who had admired her appearance now saw something different, something empty. She adjusted her posture, trying to hold on to the confidence she came with, but it no longer worked. In a place where heritage and truth mattered more than surface beauty, she felt exposed, like a flower that had bloomed in the wrong season. A woman nearby whispered, "Beauty without roots cannot stand in sacred ground." The mistress heard it and looked down, her silence growing heavier than her words. Then, slowly, the attention shifted back to the sacred seat that had caused so much pain and confusion. The elders, still standing, looked toward the wife. One of them spoke clearly, A seat of honor does not reject its true owner forever. With that, a quiet wave moved through the hall. The meaning was understood without argument. The wife, who had been humiliated earlier, was now gently invited to return to the place that symbolized respect, legacy, and truth. No celebration followed, only calm correction, as if balance itself was being restored. The wife walked forward without hesitation. Her steps were steady, her face calm. She did not look at the husband, nor did she look at the mistress. Her strength was not loud, it was rooted deeply in dignity. As she reached the seat, an elder nodded and said, "True honor does not need to fight for its place. It only needs to return." She sat down quietly, not with pride, but with peace. In that moment, the hall felt different again, not loud, not joyful, but correct, as if something broken had been placed back into order. The husband remained standing where he was, now fully exposed before the community. The confidence he once carried like armor had disappeared. There was no applause for him, no voices defending him. Only silence and truth. He looked around, hoping for something familiar, approval, respect, recognition, but found nothing. The elders watched him without anger, but also without sympathy. One of them said softly, "False power stands only until truth arrives." His words were not loud, but they cut deeper than shouting ever could. As the moment settled, a heavy silence returned over the hall. It was not the silence of confusion, but of understanding. Everyone had seen what pride could do when it is not guided by wisdom. The echoes of earlier humiliation still lingered in the air, now turned into lessons that could not be ignored. The hall itself felt like a witness to something final, something that would be remembered long after the night ended. The husband finally stepped forward, his voice low and broken as he tried to speak. I am sorry," he said. "I did not mean to bring shame. I was blind." But his words did not carry the weight of true repentance. They fell into the silence like dry leaves, heard but not felt. The elders did not interrupt him, but their eyes said what words did not need to. One elder whispered, "Regret spoken too late is like rain after harvest, it changes nothing." The wife listened to his apology without anger. She did not respond with insult or revenge. Instead, she remained still, her silence strong and complete. There was no bitterness in her expression, only understanding. It was the silence of someone who had already survived pain and no longer needed to prove her strength. An elder woman nearby looked at her and said softly, "A heart that knows its worth does not need noise to defend it." And so the hall remained still once more, not because the story was over, but because truth had already spoken. In the quiet after truth had been revealed, something deep shifted within the wife. 4 years, she had lived under the shadow of rejection, carrying pain that no one truly saw. She had waited, silently hoping for love and recognition that never came. But now, standing in the presence of elders and community, she felt something break inside her. Not her spirit, but the chains that had held her heart. She no longer needed approval from a man who failed to see her worth. A soft voice from an elder woman whispered, "A river that knows its strength no longer begs for the rock to move." The wife slowly lifted her head, as if breathing for the first time in years. From that moment, she no longer stood as someone seeking acceptance. She stood as herself, complete, rooted, and aware of her place in the world. Her heritage was no longer a hidden story, it became her identity once again. She took a small step forward, then another, until she stood closer to the elders. One of them nodded gently and said, "Welcome back, daughter of truth." There was no pride in her face, only calm confidence. The community that once overlooked her now began to see her not as a shadow, but as a woman shaped by wisdom, patience, and silent strength. Across the hall, the husband felt something he could not explain. The atmosphere had changed. People who once greeted him with respect now avoided his gaze. Their eyes no longer held admiration, but quiet disappointment. He looked around, searching for the confidence he once had, but it was gone. A young man nearby whispered, "He stood too tall without roots." Those words reached him, and for the first time, he felt smaller than the ground he stood on. The respect he once carried had turned into silence, and silence had turned into judgment. The elders did not speak loudly, but their presence alone carried meaning. One of them finally said, "When a man forgets the value of tradition, he loses the respect of the very soil he walks on. That single truth spread through the hall like wind through dry grass. His reputation, once built on pride and appearance, now lay broken. It was clear to everyone that disrespect toward family and culture was not something wealth could protect. It was a lesson written not in words, but in consequence. The mistress, who had once stood brightly in the center of attention, slowly faded into the background. No one called her name anymore. No one looked her way. The admiration she once enjoyed disappeared as quickly as it came. Without meaning or roots in that space, she became invisible, as if the hall itself had forgotten she was ever there. She quietly turned and left, her confidence replaced with silence and realization. In that moment, the truth of the night became simple and clear. A young woman whispered, "So this is the lesson?" An elder replied softly, "Yes. True worth is not in shining clothes or loud voices. It is in humility, roots, and character." Those words settled deeply into the hearts of those who listened. It was also understood that life carries an unseen balance. Those who betray loyalty or forget where they come from may walk for a time in pride, but the path always bends back toward truth. An old proverb seemed to live in the air itself: what is taken from respect will one day be returned by consequence. The wife, now fully standing in her truth, began to walk forward. Her steps were steady, not rushed, as if she had finally found the direction meant for her. She no longer looked back. The past no longer held her. Her path was now lit not by wealth or approval, but by dignity and self-worth. One elder said quietly, "She walks like someone who has remembered her own name." Behind her, the husband remained still. The hall moved around him, but he felt left behind, as if time itself had stepped away. The weight of his choices pressed heavily on his shoulders. In the silence of that night, he finally understood a painful truth: honor, once broken, does not easily return.